The night was a sanctuary for Ravan. The hum of the distant highway, the faint chirping of crickets, and the whisper of wind through the pines formed a symphony of solitude. He stretched his legs over the hood of his old, battered car, his back resting against the windshield as he gazed up at the sky. Stars spread across the heavens in a breathtaking sprawl, their cold, indifferent beauty a stark contrast to the messy, chaotic life that weighed on him. He absently sipped from the flask he'd brought, letting the burn of the whiskey settle in his chest. The world had felt heavier than usual lately, too many bills, too few opportunities, and a gnawing sense that he was destined for something more than the quiet monotony of life in his small town. But such thoughts were best left to the stars, which had a way of making him feel both insignificant and comforted. Tonight, however, the sky held something different. A sharp glint of light caught his attention. At first, he thought it was a shooting star, streaking across the inky expanse. But the light grew brighter, more vivid, until it became painfully clear that this wasn't something natural. His brow furrowed as the object descended with alarming speed, its fiery trail illuminating the treetops. Ravan sat up, heart thundering as the light disappeared beyond the horizon. Moments later, a distant crash shook the ground beneath him, followed by a deep rumble that echoed through the forest. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The rational part of him urged him to stay put, to let someone else investigate. But curiosity, or perhaps the desperate need for something extraordinary, drove him to his feet. Grabbing his flashlight from the car, he made his way toward the woods, the beam slicing through the darkness. The forest felt alive in a way it never had before. The air buzzed with an unfamiliar charge, the usual nocturnal noises silenced as if nature itself was holding its breath. Ravan pushed through the undergrowth, his boots crunching against fallen leaves and twigs. He followed the faint glow on the horizon, his gut churning with equal parts fear and anticipation. After what felt like an eternity, he reached the source. The clearing ahead was bathed in an eerie light, emanating from a sleek, metallic object embedded in the ground. Steam hissed from vents along its curved surface, and the surrounding grass was scorched in a perfect circle. Ravan froze, his grip tightening on the flashlight as he took in the sight. The craft was unlike anything he'd ever seen, seamless and organic, as if it had grown rather than been built. Holy! He didn't get to finish. A soft sound, a mix between a hiss and a sigh, drew his attention to the craft's side. A panel slid open, revealing a dimly lit interior. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a figure appeared. The being that emerged was unmistakably alien. She, or at least Ravan thought it was a she, was tall and slender, with a regal posture that seemed at odds with the way she stumbled out of the craft. Her skin shimmered with an iridescent glow, shifting hues as she moved. Long, flowing hair framed her elongated face, and her violet eyes, unnervingly large, locked onto him with an intensity that made him take an involuntary step back. She collapsed to her knees, her breaths ragged and shallow. Instinct overrode fear, and Ravan rushed forward. "Hey, are you okay?" he stammered, realizing how absurd the question sounded. Her head lifted slightly, and for a moment he thought she might not understand him. Then she spoke, a single, trembling word. "Help." Her voice wasn't human. It was melodic, a haunting blend of tones that seemed to resonate in his chest. But the plea was unmistakable. Without thinking, Ravan knelt beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly. Up close, she seemed even more otherworldly, her skin glowing faintly in the moonlight. "What do you need?" he asked. "Are you hurt?" Her lips moved, but the words were too faint to hear. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm. Her touch sent a strange warmth coursing through him, and for a brief moment he felt an inexplicable sense of calm. Then the growl shattered the moment. It came from the shadows, low and guttural. Ravan whipped his head around, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. The forest beyond the clearing seemed alive with movement, shadows shifting unnaturally. His stomach clenched as a figure emerged, hulking, predatory, and unmistakably hostile. The creature was twice his size, with jagged features that seemed carved from nightmares. Its glowing red eyes locked onto the alien woman, and a guttural snarl rumbled from its throat. 2 more creatures followed, their movements predatory and deliberate. Raven's mouth went dry. What the hell are those? The alien woman struggled to stand, her movements weak and unsteady. Danger, she managed, her voice stronger now but tinged with desperation. They followed. The lead creature snarled and lunged forward, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Raven's body moved before his mind could catch up. Grabbing a fallen branch, he swung with all his might, the improvised weapon connecting with a sickening thud. The creature staggered but didn't fall, its attention now fully on him. "Stay behind me!" Raven shouted, his voice trembling with both fear and resolve. The woman raised her hand, a faint glow emanating from her palm. A wave of energy rippled outward, forcing the creatures to pause, their movements suddenly hesitant. Raven took the opportunity to swing again, this time aiming for the creature's legs. The impact sent it crashing to the ground, but the other 2 were already advancing. The fight was chaotic, adrenaline driving Raven as he dodged, swung, and did everything in his power to keep the creatures at bay. The alien woman joined in, her strange energy pulses disorienting their attackers but clearly taking a toll on her. After what felt like an eternity, the creatures retreated, their snarls fading into the distance. Raven collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. The clearing fell silent once more, save for the soft hum of the alien's craft. The woman knelt beside him, her glowing hand resting on his arm. A soothing warmth spread through his body, easing the aches and bruises from the fight. "Thank you," she said softly, her violet eyes meeting his. "You saved me." Raven swallowed hard, still trying to process everything. "Yeah, well, you're welcome. But what the hell is going on?" Her gaze shifted toward the trees, her expression unreadable. "Later," she said, her voice carrying a note of urgency. "We must leave. More will come." As if on cue, the craft's interior began to glow, the hum growing louder. The woman rose to her feet, her movements more fluid now. She turned to him, her expression softening. "I will not forget this," she said, her voice steady. "My people will know of your courage." Before Raven could respond, she leaned forward, pressing her forehead lightly against his. The gesture was brief but intimate, leaving him with a sense of profound connection. Then she stepped into the craft, the hatch sealing behind her. The vessel rose into the sky, disappearing as quickly as it had arrived, leaving Raven alone in the clearing with only the scorched earth and his racing thoughts as evidence of what had transpired. As he made his way back to his car, one thought lingered in his mind. Whatever had just happened, his life would never be the same. Years had passed since that surreal night in the forest, but Raven could never forget it. Every so often, he would dream of the alien woman's glowing violet eyes and the faint warmth of her touch, but the memory felt more like a fevered hallucination than reality. He had told no one about what had happened, afraid of being dismissed as delusional, or worse, becoming the center of unwanted attention. Life had settled back into its predictable rhythm. He continued his work at the local scrapyard, his days filled with the clamor of machinery and the scent of rusted metal. Evenings were spent in quiet solitude, either tinkering with old engines or stargazing from the same clearing where it had all begun. Despite the mundanity, Raven couldn't shake the feeling that something in the universe had shifted that night. He felt it in the way the stars seemed to shimmer more brightly or in the faint, electric hum that sometimes lingered on the edge of his awareness. But years went by, and nothing happened. Until now. The first sign came as a subtle shift in the air. It was early evening, and Raven was heading home after a long day at work. The streets of his small town were quiet, the warm glow of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement from a recent rain. As he rounded the corner to his house, a shadow passed overhead, blocking out the stars for a split second. He stopped in his tracks, his heart racing. A strange vibration pulsed through the ground beneath his feet, faint but unmistakable. The memories of that night flooded back, and Raven felt a chill run down his spine. "No way," he muttered under his breath. The vibration grew stronger, accompanied by a low, resonant hum. Looking up, he saw a sleek, silver vessel descending silently into the clearing at the edge of town. Unlike the violent crash of years ago, this landing was deliberate, almost elegant. Before Raven could decide whether to run or investigate, a beam of light shot out from the craft, illuminating him. His instincts told him to shield his eyes, but he stood frozen, caught between fear and curiosity. Then he heard the voice. Raven. It was unmistakable, soft, melodic, and filled with a warmth that sent shivers down his spine. The hatch of the craft opened, and out stepped the woman he thought he'd never see again. She hadn't changed. Her iridescent skin still shimmered like liquid moonlight, and her violet eyes held the same intensity he remembered. But now, she wore an air of authority and elegance, her flowing attire gleaming with intricate designs that seemed to shift and dance with the light. Raven could do nothing but stare as she approached, her movements fluid and deliberate. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze locking onto his. "You remember me," she said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. It wasn't a question, but Raven nodded anyway. "How could I forget?" he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. A faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "I told you I would not forget your kindness. I have come to repay my debt." "Debt?" Raven frowned, his mind racing. "You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone would have done." Her expression softened, and she stepped closer, the faint glow of her skin casting an otherworldly light across his face. "You underestimate what you did that night. You risked your life to save mine, expecting nothing in return. That kind of bravery is rare, even among my people." He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, she raised a hand, silencing him. "Allow me to introduce myself properly this time. My name is Elvira, crowned princess of Ilara." The weight of her words hung in the air. Raven's mind reeled. A princess? He had saved a literal alien princess? He struggled to find the right words. "Why are you here now, after all this time?" Her smile widened, and for the first time, Raven noticed a faint blush tinting her glowing skin. "Because I have made a decision, a declaration that will change both our lives." Elvira turned to face the small crowd that had gathered at the edge of the clearing. Unbeknownst to Raven, the arrival of the craft had drawn the attention of the townsfolk, who now stood in stunned silence, their expressions a mix of fear and awe. Raising her voice, Elvira spoke with regal authority. "People of this world, hear me. I have come to honor the man who saved me, Raven of Earth. His courage and selflessness have earned him the highest regard among my people." The crowd murmured in confusion, but Raven's heart sank as Elvira continued. "And so, I declare this, I have chosen Raven as my consort and protector. From this day forth, he is bound to me as I am to him." The clearing erupted in chaos. Townsfolk shouted questions, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of disbelief. Raven, too, was struck speechless, his mind racing to process what had just happened. "Consort," he finally managed to sputter. "What does that even mean?" Elvira turned back to him, her expression calm but resolute. "It means that I choose to stand beside you, not just as a partner, but as an equal. Our bond will symbolize a new era of unity between our worlds." "Unity?" Raven's voice cracked. "Elvira, I'm just a guy from a small town. I don't know the first thing about interstellar politics or being a consort." Her hand found his, her touch both warm and grounding. "You are more than you realize, Raven. Your actions prove that. And I have no intention of forcing this upon you." She tilted her head, her violet eyes softening. "But if you accept, I will stand with you against whatever challenges come our way." The sincerity in her voice left him breathless. In that moment, the noise of the crowd faded, and all Raven could see was Elvira, an alien princess who had crossed galaxies to find him. He began, but his words were drowned out by the sound of distant thunder. Except it wasn't thunder. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and Elvira's expression darkened. "They've found me," she said, her voice laced with urgency. "Who?" Raven demanded, though he already had a sinking feeling he knew the answer. "The ones who tried to kill me before." Her hand tightened around his as the hum of approaching ships filled the air. "Raven," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "Will you stand with me?" His heart pounded, but he knew his answer before she even finished asking. "Yes." The aftermath of Avira's declaration was a whirlwind. Before Raven could process his own agreement to stand by her, her craft's defensive systems activated, emitting a low hum that sent the townsfolk scattering back to a safe distance. Overhead, the ominous rumble of approaching ships grew louder, but Avira was quick to act. "Inside," she commanded, pulling Raven toward the open hatch of her vessel. The interior of the ship was even more surreal than he remembered, smooth, flowing surfaces that seemed to glow with an inner light. The walls shifted subtly, adapting to their presence, and a faint hum vibrated underfoot. It was overwhelming, but there was no time to take it all in. The hatch sealed behind them, and the ship's engines roared to life. "What about the others?" Raven asked, looking toward the townsfolk retreating in panic. "They will be safe," Avira assured him. "My craft's field will shield them. But we must leave before the aggressors target you as well." The ship ascended rapidly, the view of his town shrinking below them. Raven felt a pang of guilt leaving the people behind, but Avira's firm grip on his hands steadied him. "You've done enough for them," she said softly. "Now let me protect you." As the ship slipped into orbit, the attackers appeared on the horizon. Sleek black ships with angular designs streaked across the sky, but Avira's craft was far faster. A pulse of energy shot out from the vessel, creating a distortion that concealed them from the enemy's sensors. Within moments, the pursuit ended, leaving only the vast expanse of space outside the viewport. Raven exhaled shakily. "That's the second time I've been in the middle of something way over my head because of you." Avira tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "And yet you rise to the occasion every time?" The sincerity in her tone caught him off guard. Before he could respond, she led him deeper into the ship, where a small chamber opened up. The walls displayed a panoramic view of the stars, and a low table in the center glowed softly, displaying a holographic map of the galaxy. "This is where we begin," Avira said, gesturing for him to sit. "Begin what?" Raven asked, sinking into the surprisingly comfortable chair. "Your role as my consort," she replied simply, seating herself across from him. Her iridescent skin shimmered faintly in the starlight. "If you truly accept, there is much you must learn about me, my people, and the challenges we face together." Raven leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I don't even know where to start." Avira's smile widened. "Then let us start with understanding each other." Over the next several days aboard the ship, Raven and Avira began to unravel the threads of their vastly different lives. She spoke of her homeworld, Velara, a planet of luminous cities suspended in the skies and a people who thrived on harmony with their environment. The Velari, as she explained, were deeply communal, valuing shared purpose and emotional connections above all else. In contrast, Raven's descriptions of Earth left Avira both intrigued and puzzled. The individualism, the political divides, and humanity's complex relationship with its environment were foreign concepts to her. "Your people thrive on chaos," she remarked one evening as they shared a meal, hers a delicate, glowing fruit, his a makeshift sandwich from the ship's replicator. "Yet you endure. It is admirable if not perplexing." Raven chuckled. "We're stubborn, I guess. Sometimes that's all we've got." Their conversations often veered into lighter territory. Avira was endlessly curious about Earth's quirks, its music, its art, and, to Raven's surprise, its food. "Why would anyone eat something so unhealthy?" she asked, inspecting a holographic image of a cheeseburger. "Because it tastes amazing," Raven replied with a grin. "One bite and you'd understand." She raised a skeptical brow. "Perhaps one day, you will prove it to me." Despite their differences, the two began to find common ground. Avira shared stories of her childhood, of sneaking away from royal duties to explore the floating gardens of Velara. Raven, in turn, opened up about his struggles, the loneliness of small-town life and the dreams he had long since abandoned. One night, as they gazed at the stars through the ship's panoramic viewport, Avira turned to him, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Do you regret saying yes?" she asked softly. Raven met her gaze, surprised by the question. No, he said after a moment. I don't regret it. I think I needed this. Something bigger than me. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, she reached for his hand. You are more than you know, Raven. You always were. Their growing closeness was undeniable. Small touches became more frequent. A brush of fingers, a lingering glance, and their conversations grew deeper, laced with a warmth neither could fully articulate. It was during one such moment, in the soft glow of the ship's interior, that Elvira made her intentions clear. I must confess something, she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Raven leaned forward, sensing the weight of her words. What is it? When I declared you my consort, she said, her gaze fixed on the floor, it was not solely for political reasons. His heart skipped a beat. Then why? She looked up, her violet eyes shimmering with a mixture of hope and fear. Because I care for you, Raven. More than I expected to. More than I have allowed myself to care for anyone. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Raven felt his pulse quicken as he processed her words. Finally, he managed a soft, disbelieving laugh. You traveled across the galaxy just to tell me that? Elvira's lips quirked into a smile. It seems I am as stubborn as you humans. He reached for her hand. The ship's hum was a comforting backdrop as Raven and Elvira sat together in the panoramic chamber, their hands intertwined. Raven still couldn't fully grasp the reality of his situation, hurtling through space with an alien princess who had just admitted she cared for him. I don't know how this works, he said softly, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. You're a princess from another world. I'm just a guy who fixes engines and fights off the occasional nightmare alien. Elvira tilted her head, a teasing smile playing on her lips. And yet, you are also the man who saved my life and defied odds that would break even the strongest of my kind. Titles and origins matter less than the bond we share. Her words carried a weight that silenced his doubts, at least for the moment. He looked into her glowing violet eyes and saw not just the regal authority of a princess, but the vulnerability of someone who had chosen to trust him despite their differences. Raven smirked. So, what does this bond entail? Do I have to bow? Call you your majesty? Elvira's laugh was like music, light and melodic. I would prefer you call me Elvira. But if you wish to bow, I will not stop you. She grinned. I'll pass on the bowing. The playful banter faded as a sense of calm settled between them. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, her people's traditions, his childhood misadventures, and their shared dreams of something more than the lives they had left behind. Eventually, exhaustion took over. As Elvira leaned against his shoulder, her glowing skin casting a faint light in the dim chamber, Raven felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Sleep, Raven, she murmured. We will need our strength for what lies ahead. What does lie ahead? He asked, his voice tinged with curiosity and apprehension. Her eyes fluttered shut, and her voice softened. The answers, and the fight to protect what we hold dear. Raven awoke to the ship's alarms blaring, the once calm hum replaced by sharp, urgent tones. Elvira was already on her feet, her posture rigid and her expression steely. What's happening? Raven asked, scrambling to his feet. We've been tracked, Elvira said, her voice clipped. The Cinder have found us. Raven's stomach sank. The Cinder, those monstrous creatures that had attacked her years ago, were still hunting her. Why won't they leave you alone? He asked, frustration bleeding into his voice. Because I am the last obstacle to their domination of Ilara, she explained as she guided him toward the ship's control center. My family has long opposed their expansion, and with my parents gone, her voice faltered for a moment before she regained her composure. They see me as the final threat. The control center was a flurry of activity, holographic displays projecting images of the Cinder ships closing in. Elvira moved with purpose, her fingers dancing over glowing panels as she activated the ship's defenses. What can I do? Raven asked, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline. Elvira glanced at him, her expression softening despite the chaos. Stay by my side. I will guide you. The first blast rocked the ship, sending Raven stumbling. Elvira steadied him, her touch grounding him as she adjusted the ship's trajectory. They're trying to disable us, Not destroy us, she said grimly. They want me alive, for now. Not exactly comforting, Raven muttered, gripping the edge of the console. The cinder ships were fast and relentless, firing precision shots that grazed the edges of Evira's craft. But her ship was no ordinary vessel. With a flick of her wrist, she activated a cloaking field, rendering them invisible to their pursuers for a brief moment. Hold on, she warned. The ship banked sharply, sending Raven sprawling against the wall. Evira navigated through an asteroid field with breathtaking skill, weaving between massive rocks as the cinder struggled to keep up. Raven watched in awe. You're incredible at this. Evira shot him a wry smile. Did you expect anything less from a princess? Despite Evira's skill, the cinder were relentless. They fired a disabling blast that clipped the ship, sending it spiraling. Alarms blared, and sparks flew from one of the consoles. We're losing power, Evira shouted, her voice strained. What do we do? Raven asked, his heart pounding. Evira hesitated for a split second before turning to him. There's an escape pod. You can use it to get to safety? Raven stared at her, incredulous. You think I'm going to abandon you now? Not a chance. Her expression softened, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. Raven, if they capture us? They won't, he interrupted firmly. We'll fight. Together. Her lips parted as though she wanted to protest, but something in his gaze silenced her. She nodded, a spark of determination reigniting in her eyes. Then let's make our stand, she said. Evira rerouted power to the ship's weapons, and Raven took position at a secondary console. She guided him through the controls, his hands flying over the unfamiliar interface as he targeted the cinder ships. The battle was chaotic. The cinder fired relentlessly, but Raven and Evira fought back with everything they had. He managed to land a direct hit on one of the pursuing ships, sending it spinning into an asteroid. Yes, he shouted, adrenaline coursing through him. Evira smiled, a fierce pride in her expression. Well done, Raven. Their victory was short-lived. The lead cinder ship fired a massive energy beam, striking their craft and sending it into a nosedive. The ship crash-landed on a barren moon, skidding to a halt in a plume of dust and debris. Raven and Evira emerged, bruised but alive. Are you okay? He asked, helping her to her feet. She nodded, though her gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the cinder ships were descending. They're coming, she said grimly. Raven's jaw tightened. Then we'll make our stand here. Evira turned to him, her expression both fierce and tender. Raven, I need you to understand something. If we fall here, it is not just my life at stake. The cinder will use me to destroy everything my people stand for. Then we won't let them take you, Raven said firmly. Her eyes glistened and she stepped closer, her hands resting on his shoulders. You have already given me so much, your courage, your trust. But I must ask for more. Anything, he said without hesitation. Stand with me, she said, her voice trembling. Not just for this fight but for all the battles to come. Let us face the stars together. Raven's chest tightened. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing against her glowing skin. I already told you, I'm not going anywhere. Evira's smile was radiant, even as tears glistened in her eyes. Then let us face them. Together. As the cinder soldiers emerged from their ships, Raven and Evira stood side by side, ready to fight for their survival, and for the bond that had grown between them. The cinder soldiers descended from their ships in perfect formation, their dark, angular armor gleaming under the pale light of the moon. They moved with an unnerving precision, their weapons trained on Raven and Evira. The air was thick with tension, the stillness broken only by the faint hum of energy radiating from the cinder's weapons. Raven's heart pounded as he gripped the makeshift blaster Evira had given him. The weight of it felt foreign in his hands, but the determination burning in his chest was anything but. He glanced at Evira, who stood tall and unyielding beside him, her glowing skin casting a faint halo in the moon's dim light. You sure about this? Raven asked, his voice low but steady. Evira turned to him, her expression resolute. If we do not stand our ground, they will hunt us wherever we go. This ends here. Raven nodded, his grip tightening on the blaster. Then let's give them hell. The Cinder commander stepped forward, his imposing figure towering over the soldiers behind him. His voice echoed across the barren landscape, deep and guttural. "Princess Evira," he called, his tone mocking, "you have run far and long. But this is the end of your journey. Surrender now, and perhaps we will grant your consort a swift death." Raven bristled at the venom in the commander's voice, but Evira remained composed. She stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "You speak of endings as though they belong to you," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "But I am the daughter of Ilara, and my story is far from over." The commander's laughter was a harsh, metallic sound. Brave words for someone so outnumbered. Evira's lips curved into a faint smile. "It's not bravery if you know you will win." Before the commander could respond, Evira raised her hand, and the air around her shimmered with energy. A pulse of light radiated outward, momentarily blinding the Cinder soldiers and forcing them to stumble back. Raven didn't hesitate. He took aim and fired at the nearest soldier, the blaster's recoil jolting through his arm. The shot hit its mark, sending the Cinder sprawling to the ground. The battle erupted in chaos. Evira moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, her energy shield deflecting incoming fire as she countered with precise, devastating attacks. Raven struggled to keep up, but his determination drove him forward. He ducked behind a jagged rock for cover, firing at any soldier who ventured too close. One of the Cinder lunged at him, its blade-like weapon slicing through the air. Raven barely dodged in time, the blade grazing his arm. The pain was sharp, but adrenaline kept him moving. He swung the butt of his blaster, striking the soldier's helmet and knocking it to the ground. "Raven!" Evira's voice rang out, sharp with urgency. He turned just in time to see another Cinder soldier charging toward him. Before he could react, a pulse of light struck the soldier, sending it flying backward. Evira stood a few feet away, her hands still glowing from the attack. "Stay close to me," she said, her voice firm but tinged with concern. "I'm trying," Raven panted, wiping sweat from his brow. The Cinder regrouped, their commander barking orders in their guttural language. They adjusted their formation, moving with a coordinated precision that sent a chill down Raven's spine. "We need to disrupt their ranks," Evira said, her gaze scanning the battlefield. "How do we do that?" Raven asked, firing another shot. Evira's eyes narrowed, her mind working quickly. "There's a fissure in the ground behind them. If we can force them toward it?" Raven nodded, understanding her plan. "Leave it to me." Without waiting for her response, he darted toward the Cinder's flank, his movements drawing their attention. Blaster fire erupted around him, but he kept moving, weaving between rocks and debris. "Over here, you ugly bastards," he shouted, firing wildly to keep their focus on him. The Cinder turned, their formation breaking as they pursued him. Evira seized the opportunity, unleashing a powerful shockwave that sent several soldiers sprawling. The ground beneath them trembled, cracks spreading toward the fissure. Raven skidded to a stop near the edge of the chasm, his chest heaving. "Come on," he muttered, watching as the Cinder advanced. Just as they reached him, Evira unleashed another burst of energy, the force sending the soldiers hurtling into the fissure. The ground gave way beneath them, and a deafening roar filled the air as the chasm widened, swallowing the Cinder in its depths. Silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the sound of Raven's labored breathing. He turned to Evira, who stood a short distance away, her shoulders rising and falling as she caught her breath. "You okay?" he called. She nodded, a faint smile breaking through her exhaustion. "Thanks to you." Raven walked toward her, his steps unsteady. When he reached her, she surprised him by wrapping her arms around him, her embrace warm and grounding. "You were incredible," she whispered, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "So were you," he replied, his hand resting on the small of her back. For a moment, the weight of the battle lifted, replaced by the quiet comfort of their closeness. Raven pulled back slightly, meeting her gaze. Her violet eyes were filled with gratitude and something deeper, something that made his heart race. "Raven," she began, her voice soft but steady. Before she could say more, he leaned in and kissed her, his lips meeting hers in a moment that felt both sudden and inevitable. Her hesitation lasted only a heartbeat before she melted into the kiss, her arms tightening around him. When they finally pulled apart, Elvira's glowing skin was tinged with a faint blush. "We should probably get out of here," Raven said, his voice breathless. Elvira smiled, her fingers brushing against his cheek. "Agreed. But first, let me thank you properly." She kissed him again, her touch conveying everything words couldn't. As they stood together in the aftermath of the battle, the stars above them seemed brighter, as though the universe itself had taken note of their bond. The Cinder were defeated, their shattered ships scattered across the barren moon like fallen monuments to their arrogance. Raven and Elvira stood together on the edge of the fissure, the wind carrying away the last echoes of battle. The adrenaline coursing through Raven's veins began to fade, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief and an unfamiliar but welcome sense of purpose. Elvira placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle but steady. "It's over," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "Because of you, Raven." He looked down at her, a smile tugging at his lips despite the ache in his muscles and the lingering sting of his wounds. "I think we both had something to do with it." She laughed lightly, a sound that warmed him even in the cold stillness of the moon. But the moment was fleeting, as Elvira's expression grew serious. "This was only one battle," she said, turning her gaze to the stars. "The Cinder will regroup. They always do. My people are still at risk, and I cannot let this victory lull me into complacency." Raven nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then I'll stand with you. As long as it takes." Elvira's eyes shimmered, and for a moment, she seemed lost for words. She stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face. "You don't know what that means to me," she whispered. "But this fight, it will not be easy. You'll be leaving behind everything you know." Raven covered her hand with his own, his expression earnest. "Everything I know is right here." Elvira's breath hitched, her composure faltering as a tear traced a glowing path down her cheek. "Raven." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if to promise her, without words, that he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The journey back to her homeworld of Elara was both exhilarating and daunting. Elvira's people greeted their returning princess with awe and relief, their hope rekindled by her defiance of the Cinder. But her arrival with a human by her side sparked curiosity, skepticism, and even whispers of scandal. The Royal Council, a group of advisors steeped in tradition, was particularly vocal in their concerns. They viewed Raven as an outsider, a wild card who could disrupt the fragile stability of their society. "He is not one of us," an elder said during a heated discussion in the Grand Hall. "How can he possibly understand our ways, let alone fight for them?" Raven stood tall, refusing to be intimidated by their scrutiny. "You're right," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not one of you. But I care about Elvira, and I'm willing to fight for her, and for all of you, because it's the right thing to do." The council was silent, taken aback by his directness. Elvira stepped forward, her presence commanding the room. "Raven has already proven his worth," she said firmly. "He stood by me when no one else could. He has earned his place here, not by birthright, but by his actions. And I trust him, with my life." Her declaration left no room for argument. Slowly, the council began to relent, acknowledging that their princess's choice was hers to make. In the months that followed, Raven adapted to life on Velara, learning its customs and traditions. He trained alongside Elvira's soldiers, his human ingenuity and resourcefulness earning their respect. The bond between him and Elvira deepened, their love a source of strength that inspired those around them. The Cinder, true to Elvira's warning, did not remain idle. Their next attack came swiftly, more coordinated and brutal than before. But this time, Raven and Elvira faced them as partners, not just in battle, but in purpose. Together, they led Velara's forces, rallying their people to fight for their freedom. The final confrontation was a battle of epic proportions, fought in the skies above Velara's luminous cities. With Raven's tactical brilliance and Elvira's unyielding resolve, they managed to outmaneuver the Cinder fleet, destroying their command ship and shattering their hold on the galaxy. When the dust settled, Velara celebrated not just the defeat of their enemies, but the dawn of a new era. Elvira's people embraced Raven as one of their own, recognizing that his courage and love had helped secure their future. In a grand ceremony beneath the floating gardens of Ilara, Elvira stood before her people, her hand entwined with Raven's. "My people," she began, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "today, we honor not only our victory, but the bonds that made it possible. Raven came to us as an outsider, but he fought for our home as if it were his own. He reminded us that strength is not born from isolation, but from unity." The crowd erupted in cheers, their glowing forms a dazzling display of light and color. Later that night, beneath the shimmering sky of Ilara, Raven and Elvira shared a quiet moment together. "You know," Raven said, his arm around her, "if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be living on another planet, fighting aliens, and falling for a princess, I'd have said they were crazy." Elvira smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "And if someone had told me I would find my greatest ally, and my heart, in a human, I would have said the same." They laughed softly, the sound blending with the gentle hum of Ilara's energy. "So, what's next for us?" Raven asked, looking up at the stars. Elvira tilted her head, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Whatever we choose. The universe is vast, Raven. Let's explore it together." Raven grinned, pulling her closer. "Sounds like a plan, princess." And as they gazed out at the infinite expanse of stars, their hearts beat as one, ready to face whatever adventures awaited them, together. The end.